Hello, friends. Today, I want to present you an interesting episode about Genesis from Norse mythology, a world born from ice and fire. In the vast frozen landscapes of Scandinavia and the northern reaches of Europe, a rich tradition of myth and legend took root centuries ago. The stories that emerged from the Norse people, their gods, and their cosmology became known as Norse mythology. This body of myth would go on to shape much of Western culture's understanding of ancient Scandinavian beliefs, as well as influence later storytelling, literature, and popular culture. Norse mythology isn't just a set of fantastical tales. It reflects the values, environment, and survival strategies of a people living in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The gods and goddesses of Norse myth often struggle against forces of nature, cosmic disasters, and one another, echoing the Viking way of life, where survival depended on strength, cunning, and resilience. But where did these myths come from? How were they passed down, and how did they evolve into the legends we know today? The genesis of Norse mythology is a story as vast and complex as the myths themselves, intertwined with history, geography, oral tradition, and the evolution of a people living at the edge of the known world. The roots of the Norse, Proto-Indo-European beginnings. Before delving into the myths of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, it is essential to understand the cultural and linguistic roots from which Norse mythology emerged. The peoples of Northern Europe did not develop in isolation. They were part of a broader Indo-European migration, a movement of peoples that began around 3000 BCE. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were a nomadic group whose culture, language, and religious beliefs spread across vast distances from India to Western Europe. These early Indo-European peoples carried with them a shared pantheon of gods, natural forces, and cosmological stories. From this, many of the mythologies of Europe and Asia can trace common elements. Norse, Greek, Roman, and even Vedic myths share surprising similarities. In these cultures, we find recurring motifs: gods of the sky, gods of war, trickster figures, and apocalyptic battles between good and evil. By the time the Proto-Indo-Europeans settled in Scandinavia, the harsh northern environment shaped the evolution of their stories. The gods, myths, and creatures of this northern branch of the Indo-European family began to develop their distinct features, reflecting the environment of their new homeland, a land of long winters, brief summers, endless forests, and turbulent seas. A shifting climate. Scandinavia in the Bronze Age. Scandinavia in the Bronze Age, roughly 1800 to 500 BCE, was a region undergoing both climatic and cultural shifts. The people living there were primarily agricultural, but they also engaged in trade with other parts of Europe. Evidence of this trade can be seen in the bronze artifacts found throughout the region, which were crafted from materials not native to Scandinavia. During this period, Scandinavian religion and mythology began to take a more defined shape. While we have no written records from this era, archaeological findings such as rock carvings, burial mounds, and ritual sites provide glimpses into their beliefs. Solar symbols, ships, and animals such as horses and birds appear frequently in these carvings, suggesting an early belief in a solar deity, perhaps a precursor to the later Norse god, Sol, the personification of the sun. The worship of ancestors and nature spirits was likely prevalent during this time. Scandinavian peoples may have believed that spirits inhabited the natural world, mountains, forests, rivers, and animals. These early beliefs in animism and ancestor worship would later become important aspects of Norse mythology, where gods like Thor protect humanity and spirits called Vidir dwell in nature. The mythology of this era was passed down orally, likely through songs, poetry, and ritualized storytelling around communal hearths. The cold, dark winters of the far north would have provided ample time for such stories to grow and evolve, taking on new layers of meaning with each generation. the migration period and the rise of Germanic tribes. The next major shift in the development of Norse mythology occurred during the migration period 400 to 800 CE. This era saw the movement of large groups of Germanic tribes throughout Europe, including the ancestors of the Norse people. As the Roman Empire crumbled, these tribes began to fill the power vacuum left in its wake. The Visigoths, Vandals, and Anglo-Saxons were among these groups, and their cultural and religious influences spread across the continent. For the early Norse, this period saw the continued blending of old and new traditions. The gods of the Proto-Indo-Europeans evolved, becoming the Aesir and Vanir, the two main groups of deities in Norse mythology. Odin, the All-Father, is thought to have roots in the sky gods of earlier Indo-European myth, while Thor, the thunder god, likely evolved from an older Indo-European deity of storms and fertility. During this period, the Norse people also came into contact with the beliefs of their southern Germanic neighbors. Some of these influences can be seen in the later Norse tales, which share elements with the myths of the continental Germanic tribes. The Volsunga Saga, for example, which tells the story of the hero Sigurd and his slaying of the dragon Fafnir, has parallels in the Germanic Nibelungenlied, a medieval epic. The Viking Age. The myths take shape. The Viking Age, 800 to 1050 CE, marks the period when Norse mythology reached its most recognizable form. This was the time when the Norse peoples, known for their seafaring prowess, began to raid, trade, and settle across Europe and beyond. The Vikings' longships carried not only warriors and merchants, but also their gods, beliefs, and stories to new lands, from the British Isles to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Iceland, in particular, played a crucial role in the preservation of Norse mythology. The island was settled by Norse explorers around 870 CE, and its isolation allowed many aspects of Norse culture and belief to survive longer than on the mainland. It is here that much of the mythology was eventually written down. Before this, however, the myths existed solely in oral form. Skalds, or poets, were highly respected in Viking society, and they preserved the stories of the gods, heroes, and legendary battles through their elaborate and rhythmic poetry. Skaldic verse often praised the gods and invoked their aid in battles or voyages. The Viking Age also saw the rise of a warrior ethos that is reflected in the myths. The gods of Norse mythology are often warlike, especially Odin, who is associated with wisdom, war, and death. The concept of Valhalla, the great hall where slain warriors are taken to await Ragnarok, the end of the world, reflects the importance of battle and honor in Viking culture. But it wasn't just about war. The myths of this era also reveal a deep respect for the natural world. The Norse believed in a vast cosmology, with multiple realms connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree. Giants, dwarves, elves, and other supernatural beings populated these realms, interacting with the gods and humans alike. Ragnarok and the cyclical nature of time. One of the most defining aspects of Norse mythology is its emphasis on cycles, particularly the cycle of destruction and rebirth. This is most clearly seen in the myth of Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that will end the world. According to the myth, Ragnarok will be preceded by a series of terrible events: the death of the god Balder, the binding and eventual escape of the monstrous wolf Fenrir, and a great winter called Fimbulwinter that will last for years. In the final battle, the gods and their enemies, the giants and various monstrous creatures, will fight to the death. The world will be consumed by fire and water, and most of the gods will perish. Yet from the ashes, a new world will be born. Some gods will survive, and two human beings, Lif and Lithrisur, will emerge to repopulate the earth. This cyclical view of time where endings are always followed by new. Beginning sets Norse mythology apart from many other ancient belief systems, which often emphasize linear progress or final judgment. The story of Ragnarok is not just about destruction, it's also about renewal. The end of one world marks the beginning of another. This concept may have resonated deeply with the Norse people, whose lives were shaped by the cyclical rhythms of the seasons and the hardships of surviving long, brutal winters, followed by the promise of new life in spring. The Christianization of Scandinavia and the preservation of Norse mythology. By the 11th century, Christianity had begun to spread throughout Scandinavia, largely through the efforts of missionaries and the influence of Christian kings. The conversion of the Norse people to Christianity did not happen overnight, nor was it always peaceful. Pagan temples were destroyed and new Christian churches were built in their place. The old gods were condemned as demons, and much of the traditional belief system was suppressed. Yet, paradoxically, it was during this period of Christianization that the most comprehensive records of Norse mythology were written down. Iceland, which had adopted Christianity around the year 1000, became the primary repository for the old stories. The Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, both written in the 13th century, are the two most important sources of Norse myth. The Poetic Edda is a collection of anonymous old. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, you can like and subscribe. It's free and it helps me a lot. See you next time.